Welcome to Man in America. I'm your host, Seth Holhouse. If you've seen my show before, or if you've followed me for some time, there's one thing that is very central to my beliefs and the content that I produce. I am extremely anti-communist. I hate communism. I believe that communism is Satan's own political branch. It is a system that has only left complete destruction in its wake, that's responsible for the deaths of over 100 million people. It is the greatest atrocity that has ever been thrust upon mankind. I mean, I literally look at it as if Satan was a politician, or that communism would be his religion and his political ideology. It is so destructive. And I've spent the majority of my adult life trying to point out and expose the lies of communism and to help people break free from communism. Now, there's been something happening that I felt like I needed to cover, and this might be somewhat of a controversial show, which is kind of strange to think like that because I'm anti-communist, and I would say that most of you watching are also anti-communist. At least I hope, and if you're not, then maybe you'll learn something and you'll become anti-communist. But, so with the TikTok ban approaching, there's this other app called RedNote. I'm also seeing people referred to as the Little Red Book, which is interesting because if we look, I'll pull up for you really quickly here. What is the Little Red Book? The Little Red Book. The Little Red Book. Oh, okay. Yeah. The Little Red Book was actually the book that Mao wrote that was forced upon the entire society. That was a big part of the massive communist campaigns that left millions and millions dead. So there's literally this app that some people are referring to as the Little Red Book app, which is a direct correlation to one of the most deadly pieces of literature ever written in the history of mankind, was Mao's Little Red Book. And there's a lot of questions I have. Now, what I'm seeing, though, is that because there's the concern of TikTok going away, all these people are now going to this RedNote app, which is a very Chinese app. But then what I'm seeing, though, is that people are talking about they've seen the light. Like they're all of a sudden coming to this conclusion that, wow, like China's not what I thought it was. China is this beautiful country that's very modern and advanced, and the people are happy and they're given good food and they can make an earning and they can support their family. This is what they're seeing on the app. Now, these are people that they actually, here's an example, right? So Kim Iverson, someone who I have a lot of respect for. I think she's a fantastic journalist. And I'm not saying that she is ill-intentioned here. I'm just sharing this for commentary's sake. So she just put this post out. It says, just downloaded the Xiaohongshu app. Banning TikTok is going to massively backfire. The app is showing Americans a completely different view of China. It's obvious China is the new world. Now, I appreciate Jordan Sather commenting there saying, good luck with your new spyware. But this is one of a lot of different posts that I'm seeing from people on Twitter. It's the same messaging. It's this messaging of, now that I see the RedNote app and I'm seeing the real lives of the Chinese people, wow, China's amazing. And gosh, my evil government has been lying to me and convincing me that China's evil, but actually China's not evil and people are happy. And I think somehow these people have forgotten the videos that were coming out of China during the lockdowns, during the COVID lockdowns, when people were being welded into their apartment buildings. Like, for one, it's like, oh, you want to go live there? It's like, yeah, our government, like, trust me, I'll be the first person to admit there's a lot of evil in our government. There is a deep state. There's a lot of evil in the government of Israel, which has a lot of control over our government. Okay, there it is. It's out there. I'm not denying those things. But just because our own government has some evil in it, it doesn't mean that the opposing government of China, the CCP, must be good. Like, I've come to the conclusion where I'm convinced that most governments are now evil. Like, most governments have turned evil at this day and age. And in the year 2025, I think most governments have actually been heavily corrupted, and it's just the state of the world. But it's just wild to see what I feel like this is not organic. I don't think this is just some organic process. I think that what's going on here is that this is a new round of CCP-backed psychological warfare, which if you've studied the CCP and you look and you read books like Unrestricted Warfare, or if you've read through the leaked speech of General Chi Hao-chien, it's very obvious that the CCP is at war with China, but it's not is at war with America. But the CCP's war against America is not kinetic yet. It might be, but it is unrestricted warfare. It is psychological warfare. It's economic warfare. It is patent and intellectual theft warfare. It is creating fentanyl channels, funding the cartels. It's drug warfare. That the CCP is actively working right now to destroy America. And when you look around in America, you look at the BLM riots in America, it's like, oh yeah, those were also heavily backed by the CCP. You look at so many aspects of our society that have been absolutely destroyed. So much of this goes back to the CCP. And so it makes me wonder, like, how is it that people can have such a short memory where it's like now, like, everything is about Israel? And look, trust me, I've done some deep, deep dives into the Israels, into the Jews, and I've come to a lot of conclusions there. And there's definitely a lot going on there. Trust me, I'm not saying that they're innocent, because they're not. But it doesn't mean that the CCP is good all of a sudden. Like, this is wild to think that this is where we're at. Where literally you have people saying, like, again, Kim, who I have a lot of respect for her as a journalist, saying that it's obvious China is the new world. Even the messaging there, China is the new world. Folks, wake up call. China, the CCP, they have their own vision for the world by 2049. And this is something that started with Mao Zedong. It's the 100-year march. And their goal by 2049 is to be the dominant world power, to rule the world. China, the CCP, wants a new world order. They want to be the ones at the seat of the table. Now, look, I also know that there is a Western alliance. There's a lot of other people around the world. There's the bankers of Europe. There's Israel. There's the Zionists. There's a lot of other factions that also want to control the world. But to think that everything is just this pyramid and there's one central control group, I disagree with that. All of my research has shown me that there are multiple factions battling for world control. And at the center of one of those factions that wants to absolutely decimate and level the United States is the Chinese Communist Party. And so for people to all of a sudden be thinking that, again, like major influencers, I'm seeing lots of viral posts on Twitter of people praising China and saying, wow, like I've seen the light with this RedNote app. But people don't realize, or they've forgotten what's actually happening in China right now. They've forgotten what happened during COVID, the people being welded into their apartment units. They have forgotten, or maybe they weren't aware of the fact that China, the state, right, the Chinese Communist Party, is running a state-run organ harvesting operation of its own people. Look, if you're Christian and you wanted to go to China and you bring your King James Bible there, they're going to confiscate it. You can't have that Bible in China. They have restrictions. They have an edited version of the Bible that you can have, that they've edited out a lot of the miracles of Christ in their Bible. So there's a lot of Christians, there's a lot of underground house Christians in China that if they get caught, they're going into black jails. And once they're in the black jails, they get put into the organ database. The Falun Gong. There's a massive, massive community of the Falun Gong practitioners, a peaceful meditation practice in China that literally are sitting in prison camps right now, or sitting in hospitals and detention camps. And the hospitals are underneath the hospitals and prisons. Like I've researched this extensively. They are all part of a living organ database. So the Chinese government, this Chinese Communist Party, is literally arresting their own citizens because of their spiritual beliefs, or because they have the wrong version of the Bible. They're putting them into black prisons and they're putting them into labor camps. But then you have all these wealthy people around the world that need a liver. And it's like, oh, it's only a 2 or 3 week wait to get a liver from China. That's a miracle. No, it's not a miracle. They are literally killing to order. So if you need a liver and you go to China to get a liver, they are literally taking someone in their database that matches your blood type and what you need, and they are killing them and selling you their organs. And this is happening to this very day. So for anybody who says, gosh, our American government is so evil, I'd rather live in China, either they're ignorant of what's happening in China, they're being paid off, they're being controlled, or some other reason that I can't understand. Because, like, I've been to China multiple times. Like, I used to spend almost 3 months out of every year between over my primarily in Hong Kong, but Hong Kong, China, and Taiwan. So I'm not just some guy that, sitting in, in his flannel shirt in America thinking I know what life is like over in China. I've been there. A lot of my friends came out of Chinese prison camps. This is stuff that's, like, very, very near and dear to me. My wife, who's Australian, she's, white can be, was arrested in Tiananmen Square in the early 2000s for protesting human rights abuses in China. She was arrested there, right? It's one of our commonalities. We both hate communism. It's been a great relationship because of that. So anyway, this is just like, it's just amazing to me. And what I see now, I might be wrong, but I really believe that this whole trend with this RedNote and the fact that it's going viral on Twitter and everyone's kind of flocking to it, they have this new beautiful idea of China. I think that what this is some sort of new campaign by the CCP. It's a campaign of basically corralling people that should be the ones that are outspoken against communism, they're fighting against communism and fighting for the Constitution and freedom, the patriots, that they're trying to co-opt this movement and these people saying, oh yeah, China's the new world. And it's very frightening to me. And so joining me for today's show is a guy named Levi Browde, who is the executive director of the Falun Dafa Information Center. He's a guy that has been, really fighting against the Chinese Communist Party for many, many decades, and that has a deep, deep knowledge and understanding of what modern China is like. So folks, I hope that you enjoy this interview. I hope that it's enlightening to you. And if you are moved, if you watch this interview and you feel like it's important, I hope you can share it with your friends and family, because we have to get this kind of information out. Now, look, I don't want to say that all the evils of the world are caused by the CCP, because no, like, I trust me, there's a lot coming out of Europe, there's a lot coming out of the Middle East, there's a lot coming out of our own government. So there's evil in all these different places. But again, I don't want us to fall for some sort of psychological operation where all of a sudden we think that one of the most tyrannical governments in the world, which is the Chinese Communist Party, is somehow good. Like, to me, it's mind blowing, right? It's crazy that we could think that. I mean, look at the social credit score system in China. Like, go find some videos over there. Like, watch what life is really like in China. And again, the Chinese are the masters, the masters, especially the CCP, the masters of propaganda and the masters of censorship. So do you think that this RedNote app, I mean, honestly, ask yourself this. If you were a Chinese dissident, say you were a house Christian in China, and say your mom was taken away and she's in a labor camp, if you took your phone and you're like, hey, hey, Americans, please, like, my mom's being tortured for being a Christian. Please get this message out on RedNote. Do you think that post is going to go viral on a state-run app? No. What's going to be going viral on these apps? It's like, wow, look at my fancy car in Beijing and look at this technology. And of course, there's amazing things over in China. They've got amazing technology. They've got a great high-speed rail system. Like, they're way more advanced than America in certain ways, but there's still a totalitarian regime that slaughters its own citizens and sells their organs on not even the black market, the state-run organ market. So anyway, folks, as you can tell, I'm a little bit passionate about this discussion, because it's really, really important to the future of America for us to understand that communism is bad, and that China, though they want to make you think they've opened up and they're capitalist, it's still being ruled by an iron fist. And if you step outside of what they want you to do in that country, you will be put into a prison. You will have your organs cut out of you. You will be tortured. I've met dozens, if not hundreds of people and personally talked to them about these exact stories. It's still going on today, folks. So folks, please enjoy this interview with Levi Browde. Do you keep hearing more cases of your friends and family getting a life-threatening diagnosis of cancer? Or perhaps it's even happened to you? Well, the unfortunate reality is that turbo cancer is now a worldwide epidemic. But the question we should all be asking is, what can I do about it? Well, the good news is that there are therapies that are working and proven in thousands of clinical studies. So, one study on PubMed found that breast cancer's growth rate dropped by 40% in only 24 hours after using red light therapy. Another study on prostate cancer found that 49% of the over 400 male participants went into remission with just one red light therapy session. A lymphoma cancer pilot study showed that 3 out of 3 of the patients became cancer free. It sounds unbelievable, but it's true. And you can discover all this information and more in a special training program from investigative medical journalist Jonathan Otto, who will show you how you can use red light, including the specific wavelengths as proven by studies, for all different types of cancer, as well as tinnitus, weight loss, wrinkles, acne, dementia, cognitive function, depression, anxiety, long COVID, jab injuries, stem cell regeneration, lower back pain, sciatica, the whole array of autoimmune diseases, including thyroid disease, arthritis, lupus, and gut disorders, and so much more. In fact, you can get your own in-home red light therapy device risk-free, as you're completely covered by a 60-day money-back guarantee and a 3-year warranty. On top of that, we've got financing options so you can get it now and pay later. And the best thing, folks, is that this technology has become amazingly affordable. It's way less than you'd expect, with the smaller units costing only a couple $100. So just go to myredlight.com to make sure you don't miss out this free special training program and claim the extremely limited time bonus gifts and discounts, which include an additional 10% off with the coupon code SETH. Again, go to myredlight.com to get access to the free training. And if you make a purchase, make sure you use a promo code SETH, that's SETH, to get an additional 10% off the already heavily discounted red light therapy products. Mr. Levi Browde, it's an honor to have you on the show. Thank you very much for giving me your time today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here.
So you are the executive director of, I'll bring up the website, of falleninfo.net, right? The Fallen Dafa Information Center. And I know that I've been following the work of Fallen Info for quite some time, even going back to some of my work with the Epoch Times, and it was a key resource for us in understanding what's happening inside of China, the true nature of what's going on inside of China. But give us just a quick background before we jump into today's topics and discussion of so what's Falun Gong? What's your role in this? How does it tie into modern day China, and why is this something that people in America should really be concerned about? Right, we have so many threats and so many things that within our own government or other countries. Why should people care about this practice over in China?
Sure. So, briefly, Falun Gong is a Buddhist-based spiritual practice, and like many what they call Qigong or Chinese yoga practices, these kind of practices of mind and body, spirit development in China were very popular for thousands of years. But Falun Gong was introduced for the first time in 1992, and so during the 1990s, it became wildly popular. I mean, if you go into any park, any village in China, people were practicing Falun Gong. 100 million people by the government's own estimates by the turn of the century. However, that number was very large, and the Chinese government, particularly the top leaders, said, okay, this is way more people than even members of the Communist Party. So in 1999, he ordered this practice, again, that was at that time very beloved, very embraced by the Chinese people, to be crushed, to wiped out. And so for the last 25 years, if you practice Falun Gong in China, you are subject to arbitrary detention, torture, death by forced organ extraction. It's been horrific. But the problem is the persecution is not limited to the Chinese borders. Throughout these 25 years, the Chinese regime has engaged in transnational repression against the Falun Gong diaspora all around the world, but particularly here in the United States. And so I think for Americans, while it is also a terrible human rights tragedy that we should care about just on the moral principles of it, it is also unfortunately, a quintessential example of CCP influence on U.S. soil and the dangers of that influence to manipulate American society, to control the levels of power here. It's a big red flag and a big sort of canary in the coal mine for that whole issue. So that's really sort of at a very high level what the Falun Gong issue.
And so you mentioned kind of looking at the canary in the coal mine of the influence that China has over America. And what's interesting, for me observing from my standpoint, being in independent media and what some might call the alt-right media, right, is I'm seeing, I've seen a trend of say 2 or 3 years ago, there was a very strong anti-communist sentiment, and I think there still is, but it was a very keen awareness to the role of the CCP, and I was doing shows on the CCP and their overall plan against America and unrestricted warfare, their final war, their long march towards global domination by 2049, and I was talking about a lot of these topics and saw a lot of people that were really kind of embracing that idea. But what's interesting though is it seems like there's been a shift, and now I'm seeing more and more people, even more conservative people, that are saying, well, China's really the boogeyman. They're not really a threat. Our threat is Israel. Our threat is our own government. Or there's been this shift away from China. And what I've seen even so more recently is, as we're approaching the TikTok app ban, which it looks like maybe Kick might be a buyer for it to keep it alive, because I think that was the agreement, is that they had to have a Western buyer that was going to own a majority of the operations outside of China for it to be allowed to be in America still. So it looks like there's a buyer. There's the idea of Elon Musk might be a buyer for it, but it looks like it might continue. But what's interesting though is that there's been this other app called RedNote, and I think the app icon is maybe it's red. It's very CCP looking. Reminds you of Mao's little red book. But I'm seeing, and I'll pull up some information of people that, like here, for instance, this is Kim Iverson, who is a fantastic journalist. I saw her tweet this just yesterday, and I thought it just something. No, actually, it was early this morning. I think something seemed really off. She said just downloaded the Xiaohong Shu app. I think it was with the RedNote app. And she says banning TikTok is going to massively backfire. The app is showing Americans a completely different view of China. It's obvious China is the new world. And this is someone, Kim is very aware of, like the deep state, and she's covered extensive stuff. So it was odd seeing that. But then I saw another post talking about this. This is a woman that was in China. This post was going viral. And she says the real plot twist, some Western media has been busy painting China as a threat, while Americans are waking up to the fact that they've been exposed to propaganda for years. Americans are scrolling through and seeing the actual high quality life in China: peaceful, safe, and clean cities, modern infrastructure, thriving tech, and education systems that elevated generations to create technology. So you have this whole narrative emerging that is painting this picture that our government has been demonizing China as evil, but it's just part of our own government's propaganda, and that China is this great place. And I've got one video to show. This right here really summarizes, I think, what's going on. So it says, MAGA TikToker in RedNote, and can't believe how China has outachieved the United States. So anyway, I'll play this really quickly. It's a little over a minute long, and listen to this, because this, to me, this minute-long video represents what I think is the pinnacle of what I feel like is some sort of campaign by the CCP to actually dupe the MAGA movement.
The government has been lying to us about China for decades. Now that we've all gotten on RedNote and we can see the lifestyle that all of the Chinese people have, a lot of us Americans are pissed. The price of going out to eat, the price of groceries, public transportation. And the people on RedNote are so flabbergasted that we have to work 2 jobs just to keep our roof over our head. US government, you up big time, which is not a surprise because you do it constantly. Even if TikTok gets banned, I've seen enough. I have been woken up. I grew up fed propaganda that China is evil and that they treat their citizens like I was raised by MAGA. It's the main reason why I feel so radicalized. American culture, American society is toxic, gross, poisonous. They poison our food. They jack the prices up of everything. We don't get health care. We don't get good public transportation, even though we're all on the same continent. We destroy the planet for money, power, and control. Our government is funky as on the left and on the right. Don't get it twisted. This is a class war, and I will not be giving this fight up. We deserve sovereignty.
So those are some strong words. This is this guy refers to as a MAGA influencer that is now, because she's now using the RedNote app, which is showing her, she's realizing that, wow, what I'm seeing on this app, China's this beautiful place where they have this advanced technology and the citizens are free, they have good food they're taken care of. And I'm not sure how people have forgotten the scenes from COVID where they're welding the apartment doors shut in China, when you have the videos of the people crying at night because they're all welded into their apartment complexes. I mean, it just seems like, and maybe I'm looking too far into this, but I feel like that this woman, maybe not intentionally, but there's some sort of money or influence coming from China that's trying to now create this campaign that the American government and the Israeli government and the Western governments are pure evil. And look, I'll be the first to agree that there's a lot of evil in these governments. I'm not going to say they're innocent, but when she's saying that we've been brainwashed to think that China is evil, now she's realizing it's not. I mean, I know that through your work, Levi, you're constantly communicating with people that have come out of China, that are still in China, that you're on the forefront of understanding what's really going on in China, especially if you're someone that is kind of classified as one of the spiritual dissidents or one of the enemies of the state. So, how would you respond to this?
So I think the first question is, what are we looking at? And I think there could be two possible, perhaps more, but two possible answers. One is we know that the Chinese regime has extensive influence operations to buy, cajole, or somehow convince influencers to just say what we said. So are we looking at an actor? Because that happens at a scale far more than I think we're even aware of right now, where you just get influences that either they were paid or something to deliver a message, and that's what she's doing. She doesn't believe what she says, but that's what she's doing. So that's one option of what we're looking at. The other option of what we're looking at is someone who generally feels this way and actually was kind of looking at that app, convinced of this thing, and is telling you her true thoughts. Both exist. But on the latter option, I think we have to understand about the CCP is they are the king of the false equivalency. I always remember, like, during one of the mass shootings, the Golden State Warriors were touring in China at the time, and their head coach, Steve Kerr, known as a very intelligent man, sort of, liberal, but very savvy, intelligent person. And one of the reporters asked him, what about all the human rights abuses in China? And he sort of sat there for a minute. And he goes, well, what about our mass shootings? What about this? He's literally comparing a nation which conservative estimates have said is responsible for 60 to 100 million people killed, died under the Chinese regime over the last 70 years. He's comparing us to a regime that right now is guilty of not one, not two, but three ongoing genocides against the Uyghurs, the Tibetans, and the Falun Gong. So you just take that big picture and sort of that kind of nation, and he's in his mind saying, well, what about, don't get me wrong, mass shootings are horrific and terrible, but an occurrence of several mass shootings is not equivalent to a tyrannical regime that is responsible for 100 million of deaths of its own citizens, that has ongoing genocides. I mean, these are two very different worlds, but I think the CCP is a master at the false equivalency, at trying to get nations and people, like perhaps this TikToker we just watched, to not see the magnitude of the difference and to focus on and utilize really the person's own emotions. Because again, if this was option two, if this was a person genuinely speaking or feeling, obviously there's feelings. Obviously the United States isn't perfect, and they're honing in on that, and they're trying to weaponize that to take down the US. So I think it sort of depends on what we're looking at. Both options are definitely pervasive and they're out there, but those two things are very much at work. And I think they're part of this whole equation of trying to influence how Americans feel about their own country.
And there's one thing that I can say too, because I've worked with a lot of Chinese over the years of doing work to counteract different things that are happening within China, and I can say that to me there's a big difference between China and the CCP. Like, I love China, I love the Chinese history. I've read a lot of the Chinese great novels, Journey to the West, Outlaws of the Marsh. Like, I'm fascinated by the deep 5,000 plus year culture of China. But China is not the CCP, and the CCP is not China. And I think that the Chinese, the CCP especially, you mentioned that kind of the false representation and the propaganda. I mean, they're absolutely masters of it. And this is what I've seen, because I've been to China many times. I've spent, I used to spend 3 or 4 months every year in Hong Kong, doing business in Hong Kong. I've been to Taiwan, China, Hong Kong, quite a lot. And I can tell you that China is a place that I was mostly in southern China, where almost anything you look at, you go to a nice hotel or whatever it is, on the surface, it looks beautiful. and it looks like it's like some sort of palace out of, Paris. But then when you look at the details behind it, you can see that it's not. It's plastic. There's, there's kind of poor building materials. It's so they're the masters at creating a surface perception. And what I think is happening with this RedNote app that everyone's now flocking to is that what they're doing is that I'm sure that there's massive levels of censorship. I doubt there's anybody on there saying, "Hey, my social credit score is only 500, so I couldn't even ride the bus today because I was questioning Xi Jinping's leadership," or I shared a poo meme, 3 years ago, and now I can't, buy a house because of that. I'm sure that that stuff's not making it into the app. And so it sounds like what they're doing though is that they're using this app to give this very select, kind of window into China. And not to say that the people of China are good people. I mean, now a lot of them, I think they have been influenced by living under communism, and they're atheist, and there's a lot of immorality there that I've seen and experienced. But I think that the soul of the nation is virtuous and good, and the people want goodness. And so that's my perception as well, is that they've done is they've created this kind of facade. They've put a lipstick on a pig, right? And they're making people think that, oh, because I see all these people on this RedNote app that are loving life in China, it's like the Chinese, like how have we forgotten that they're communists, and the communists are the masters of disguise, or the masters of propaganda and information war?
I think, yeah, a couple things come to mind. I think we typically, when we hear that the communists are masters of propaganda, we kind of tend to think about those really on the nose, obviously propagandistic sort of posters from the 60s and the 70s. And we're like, who falls for that stuff? I mean, all that sort of old world, you look at the Bolsheviks and when Mao was coming to power and the kind of propaganda, we think that's just ridiculous. Nobody's doing that anymore. That doesn't exist. And in a lot of people's minds, that's what Chinese propaganda looks like, or as you correctly point out, CCP propaganda. But it's far more sophisticated than that, far more sophisticated. It is their core competency. I remember General Spalding, who was for many years, he was the senior military attaché to China, fluent in Chinese. He was testifying in Congress last year. And I think one of the things he was trying to convey is that if you look at the array of threats that the CCP presents to the United States, obviously there's military, there's political, there's economic. And he was thinking, he essentially said, I'll paraphrase him, you're missing the main thing. The main thing is messaging. The main thing is propaganda. It's their top priority, because that's how they're not going to win, or they're not going to topple the United States with a military confrontation. Even economically, it's very difficult. The way they're going to do it is without firing a shot, with the ability over many, many years of getting Americans to hate their country, think well of the CCP, and all the things that come with that. I'm reminded of a story from one of my friends who went back to China. She's from Taiwan, and she's one of these families, right? They came over with Chiang Kai-shek, and they lived in Taiwan for decades and decades under a democracy, and they were going to be reuniting with their family in the mainland after like 50, 60 years. And they were thinking, going there, oh, China's so ahead of everything. They saw the fast trains and the skyscrapers. And they were like very excited, and they went back and they met their in-laws, and they came back to Taiwan, and they're like, China's not 50 years ahead of us. They're 3 generations behind, because living under communism, a real regime, a tyrannical regime, so messes up the psyche, so destroys the family unit, the community unit, that just recovering from that psychologically in the community is going to take a generation or two. And that was sort of an aha moment of what the actual CCP had done to the Chinese people, its culture, its communities itself. And I thought that was a real kind of eye opener, and sort of cuts through whatever this nonsense that RedNote is trying to convince the world of.
And that was, my experience was similar in being there. And there absolutely are areas which are very, very well developed. I've never been to Beijing or Shanghai, but I've got a lot of friends that, have lived there and traveled there. I know that there are certain areas that are very, very advanced, high speed rails and everything. But then there's also the rural China. There's the areas that aren't the places where they want the Western world to see. And it's a third world country. I mean, these are places where, factories are openly dumping pollutants into the rivers or upstream of villages, and the villagers are all dying of cancer. They go to protest it. The factory pays off the local CCP boss. They bring out thugs to beat up all the villagers and steal their homes. They go to Beijing to petition against what just happened in their local region. and they're arrested and put into black jails, and then end up they probably have their organs harvested. And this is the reality of modern day China. But even with the organ harvesting, this is something that I kind of go back on, because I've had different discussions with people that say, look, the West has become very evil, they're doing bad things. I was like, yeah, there's a lot of bad stuff going on in the West. And, if you look at even the origins of COVID, now it ties into the labs here in America. Okay, there's some very suspicious ties that do point to our own government. But what I would say, though, is that our government is not openly running an organ harvesting operation of its own citizens, right? So give us a little insight into that. If someone is not familiar with that, what is the scale? Is there this state-run organ harvesting operation that's still continuing, like even to this day over in China?
Very much so. And this was probably the most horrific thing that came out of the whole Falun Gong persecution. We first started hearing about this in the mid 2000s, and I think the first whistleblower or two, one was the wife of a surgeon who came forward, and then you had other people, other doctors coming forward, victims coming forward. So essentially, what we learned in the latter part of the 2000s is that, again, when Falun Gong was first persecuted, you had 100 million people around the country, and so very quickly the CCP had hundreds of thousands and then over a million Falun Gong practitioners being held in various detention centers at that time, when they had labor camps, and facilities, most of whom were not giving their name, so no one knew where they were. And here they were practicing Falun Gong, which means they don't drink, they don't smoke, they're very healthy, they meditate, the ideal candidate for an organ donation. China was not even a player, really, on the organ transplantation business back then. They surged, I think, in the span of 10, 12 years to become number 2 in the whole world. And according to the China Tribunal, which was this year-long investigation that was held in London back in 2019 rather, they found that tens of thousands, according to their numbers, tens of thousands of Falun Gong practitioners were being killed each year to harvest their organs and fuel this organ transplantation business. And again, it was a business, you looked at the curve, it was unprecedented how China went from almost nobody to the number 2 player in the world. And some of the stuff was very, it's not like it was all anecdotal or things like that. I mean, there was very obvious things. For example, one of the key investigators, who was the former former official in Canada for the Asia Pacific region, they would actually get on a phone with the hospital in China, the administrator, some cases the doctor, pretending to be someone who needed an organ. And they'd ask him, hey, when could I get this done? And they said you could schedule it a week or 2 ahead of time. Well, anybody who knows the organ transplant business, obviously, it's usually years you're waiting. You have to wait till someone dies in a car accident or something. That the only way they could schedule it a week or 2 in advance is they had someone pre-screened for their blood type and all the other things they need to screen for, ready to kill for when you to come into China. And they even a couple of times would even admit these were Falun Gong people. I mean, so they were openly talking about this on the phones. It was absolutely shocking. It was so shocking, I think, that a lot of the world had trouble with it. I mean, it was very hard for people to believe that something so evil would be happening in such a, at that time, rapidly developing country, a country that's part of the WTO, a country that's sort of active trade with the United States in so many levels. And so it really faced a lot of pushback. I think it wasn't really till that tribunal in 2019 that some of the major media started picking up. The Guardian started looking at this and said, I think we have a real problem. And one of the key findings of the tribunal was that, initially, obviously, the Chinese government denied it. And then after enough evidence came out, they said, we're not doing that anymore. Not perhaps realizing that's tacitly admitting they were doing it. But one of the things the tribunal found out in 2019, yes, it's still very much happening today. And it's now no longer just Falun Gong. It's spilled over into Uyghurs, perhaps House Christians and others. And this is very much still happening in China today.
And that's something also I think a lot of people that I've kind of mentioned, kind of more the conservative alternative media, a lot of them are strong Christians, and they don't understand that their Bible, if they brought their Bible, King James or Red Letter Bible, whatever their Bible they're reading, into China, it would be seized, and if they're lucky, they wouldn't be arrested for it, because even the official CCP Bible, they've actually edited out a lot of the miracles of Christ, because they don't want people. I mean, because fundamentally, the CCP is a god. but they'll let you have your religion as long as it doesn't step on the toes of the CCP. And so you're right, there's a massive amount of underground Christians that have had their organs harvested, as well as the Falun Gong. And so, but one thing I want to ask you though is as we're looking at their influence over what's happening here in America, I think that a lot of us have seen, especially in the past couple of years, that our mainstream media has been weaponized against we the people. It was weaponized against Donald Trump. It's been weaponized against really anybody that doesn't follow the particular narrative that they want you to follow. But how much control would you say that the CCP has over our media? Because if you look at the fact that there's this really, that you mentioned 3 ongoing genocides, organ harvesting, et cetera. If this was happening in Rwanda, our media would be all over it, right? But you rarely see the coverage like this. And actually, I remember when I lived in New York City and I worked in the newspaper industry there, I'd pick up sometimes a Wall Street Journal or New York Times. I'd open up and, oh, there's a China Daily inside. Like there's literally a state-run Chinese English newspaper, which is literally a propaganda mouthpiece of this Chinese Communist Party, that was stuffed inside of the Wall Street Journal. And I couldn't believe it. It's like, oh my gosh, like it's this deep. So in your assessment though, especially looking back on the media's coverage or the lack of coverage of these genocides, how much control do you think the CCP has over our media here in America?
Well, I mean, this is always tough because, people like myself, we're not in the back rooms of this media. We don't know sort of the decisions are being made, but there is very clear trends and very clear data that we could look at, which I think paint a pretty obvious picture. So let's go back to the beginning of the persecution of Falun Gong back in 99, 2000. At that time, some of the media was doing a very, very good work. The Wall Street Journal actually won a Pulitzer Prize in the year 2000. They were the first ones who went through China and documented that, yes, indeed, Falun Gong are being tortured and they're being tortured to death in prisons around China. And that was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, Pulitzer Prize. The Washington Post followed that up. And they were the first ones who got like a Chinese official on record to say, this is not just rogue police officers. This is from Beijing, from the top. They're mandating the use of violence. They're mandating the use of brainwashing against Falun Gong. Groundbreaking work. Then about 2002, 2003, everything goes silent. Even though the heartbeat of the data, which I would say is largely in the human rights organizations, is still there. Every year you hear about the torture of Falun Gong, the widespread detention of Falun Gong. At 2002, 2003, it all goes silent. So a couple things there. We actually we had some media we were meeting with in Australia leading up to the 2008 Olympics, and they just openly came out and told us, if we cover Falun Gong, it's now a third rail issue. If we cover Falun Gong, we can't go into China and cover the Olympics. Sorry. Now, at least those are the guys who are telling the truth. The other things we've seen is that there have been media over the years that have tried, they booked an interview with a Falun Gong person, or they booked something to cover the forced organ harvesting story. The Washington Post is an example of this, and they call the embassy, the Chinese embassy in Washington, to get a comment. Guess what? Later that afternoon, the story is killed. This happened time after time after time after time. So this is another obvious thing that we note. I think the most egregious example, although it's not the only one, would be the New York Times. And the New York Times really, I would say, has had a Falun Gong problem from the very beginning. When the persecution first started, they were one of the few media that was repeating CCP propaganda verbatim, like not even quoting it, just sort of, if the CCP called Falun Gong a cult, they just said that. For many, many years, they completely ignored the persecution. And we did a whole study on this, by the way. We went through like 160 articles over a span of 25 years in the New York Times and found absolutely egregious ignorance about the persecution. And we even have graphs that show, Uyghurs, they covered up here, Tibetans, they covered up here, and Falun Gong way down here, almost nothing. And so it was very clearly they were avoiding discussing the Falun Gong issue until they went on the offensive, until the Falun Gong diaspora gave rise to arts organizations, media organizations, human rights organizations that were a potent force on the world stage for airing the dirty laundry of the CCP. At that point, coincidence or not, that's when the New York Times turned focus, and really all their articles about the Falun Gong topic, certainly this past year, but really going back to 2018 or so, have been not on the persecution. They've by the account of one of their own reporters, they've actually tried to hide or downplay or kill the story of forced organ harvesting. They've really turned their focus on the Falun Gong diaspora and the talking points, the framing, the narratives that they're using, wittingly or not.
A future where every decision you make today creates a foundation of security for tomorrow. Right now, optimism fills the air. A new chapter under Trump is beginning and opportunities seem endless. Markets are climbing, spirits are high. But beneath the surface, whispers of change grow louder. Policies, tariffs, and global shifts are shaping a new economic landscape. The US dollar holds strong, but what happens when the world questions its place, which is already happening? What happens when nations turn away from the familiar and toward the uncertain? Gold is different. For centuries, it has been an anchor in the times of change, a hedge against inflation, a shield against volatility, a sanctuary when the world feels unsteady. Gold doesn't follow the tides, it remains steadfast, unyielding, and enduring. Close your eyes and imagine your wealth secure. Imagine your future unshaken. This is the promise of gold, a tangible investment free from the whims of politics and markets. The time to act is now. While optimism reigns and markets soar, remember that true wisdom comes from preparing for what others cannot see. Gold is not just an investment, it is your anchor, your protection, your legacy. Take the first step towards securing your future. And there's no better company to work with than Noble Gold. Protect your future. Act now. Call 626-654-1906 or visit goldwithseth.com to get your free gold and silver investment guide. Again, that's 626-654-1906 or goldwithseth.com.
Are perfectly in line with what Beijing has wanted to do and their approach, their propaganda towards Falun Gong. And I think that's a huge red flag that there's such an alignment there. And that's one of the more disturbing things we're seeing. So back to your question, what's the level of influence of operation? Just looking at the data, just looking at the trends, it doesn't look good.
And so, what about? I know they've also heavily attacked the Shenyun, right? So here you go, China before communism, right? This is a traditional Chinese dance, and you'd think it's like, okay, well, why would the CCP and through their tentacles into the media or the agencies or control they have here, why would they be attacking this dance company, which most people have seen the billboards for this or the commercials, and I've seen the show a handful of times. And it's a beautiful show. I mean, it's like you walk out of it thinking like, wow, like I just kind of like saw some part of heaven or something. But what explain like what is Shenyun and like what's happening? Like why are the media like attacking Shenyun? Like what's happening here? Like and what do you think's behind this?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, this is a great example of the larger influence operations and what's motivating them and the scope of their effectiveness. So Shenyun was founded by Falun Gong practitioners back in 2006. And really, the idea back then was there was a broad awareness in the Falun Gong community, especially the diaspora, that the persecution of Falun Gong really wasn't just about Falun Gong. Because if you look at Falun Gong, it's Buddhist-based teachings. It embraces principles like compassion and honesty and forbearance. It was heartland Chinese. It was sort of like, it was hard to separate authentic Chinese culture really with Falun Gong entirely. And that is a general phenomenon in the West. The line between faith and everyday life, secular life, is a little bit more intertwined than you think of it in the West. But it was really an outgrowth of traditional Chinese culture. It had the spirituality of it. And so when they went after Falun Gong, in many respects, it was like the last nail in the coffin to completely destroy authentic Chinese culture. So the communist ideology would have absolutely no challenge. And so when some who were proficient in arts, choreography, dance, what they realized is, okay, this culture, the real Chinese culture, is about to be wiped out of the face of the earth. Let's build a place where we can revive it, teach it to the next generation, and share it with the world. And so they built a campus up in upstate New York called Dragon Springs. And Dragon Springs has an academy and a college, but it's also the headquarters of Shenyun. And Shenyun, the whole point of that was, let's show this culture to the world. Now, by doing that, however, what they're really doing from the CCP perspective is two things. They're showing how beautiful and wonderful China is without communism. That's the first thing. The second thing they're doing is, the show spans 5,000 years of history. You see a little of the Tang Dynasty, the Han Dynasty, but it has a couple pieces of modern day China. And so it's showing the tyranny of the CCP today. And it's showing the peaceful resilience of Falun Gong people and others standing up to that tyranny today. And so that was the second thing. On stage for the world to see, literally over 1 million people every year, the tyranny of the CCP, what it's really like. And so for those two reasons, that China is a wonderful spiritual place without communism, and that the modern day tyranny of China is real, those two messages very clearly come through the show. And for those two reasons, the CCP really makes sabotaging, canceling Shen Yun one of its top priorities. I mean, at this point, Shen Yun's been around for 18 years. Every single theater they've performed at around the world at some point has gotten a letter, a phone call, a knock at the door from the ambassador, the Chinese ambassador, or one of his lieutenants, or somebody, some thug working on their behalf, trying to get the show canceled, trying to put pressure on the local mayor or the governor to get the show canceled. I mean, in the Dominican Republic, they went so far as the Chinese ambassador chased the president of the country down at the airport and started threatening him with political things and economic things, and you can't have this show. That's how adamant they are to not let the world see this message. Because if you think, going back to your RedNote example, and this young woman we watched on TikTok, it's kind of the antidote to that, right? It's sort of like, this is how wonderful China is without communism, and this is what the tyranny of the CCP is about, and they do not want the world to see that message.
Because I think that it fundamentally, when you build up a regime of lies, and this is through my own research into communism, and not just communism, just tyrannical regimes in general, their most powerful tool is the lie, right? And I think it's actually, I look at communism as being Satan's own political branch. That's how I refer to it. They say Satan is the great deceiver. He's the master of lies. It's like, if he was a politician, he would be a communist. And what you see, though, is because he maintains his power through lies, through deception, through darkness. And when you shine a light on anything like that and you bring the truth to it, so look at truth as being the light. You shine a light into the darkness, and it always wins, right? Like, you can't shine darkness onto light and win. You know what I mean? Like, darkness can't conquer light. Light always conquers darkness. It's a fundamental principle of how this world was created by God. And so I think that if you look at communism as being Satan's political branch, it's built on lies. And so what destroys that structure is truth. And so if you think about, why is Shen Yun such a threat to the Chinese Communist Party? Why are the Epoch Times or New Tang Dynasty Television, NTD, why are they threats to the CCP? Because they're exposing the truth of the CCP. Why is RedNote probably a really good tool of the CCP? Because it spreads the lies about the CCP. Now, not to say that there's not, potentially some, people living in China that have a good life and maybe they're doing well. And okay, I'm sure that exists. But I think we both know what life is like for the people that aren't on the good side of the CCP. And I think that's what the threat is that Shen Yun or these other media companies, that they just tell the truth about what communism is like in China.
Yeah, and when I talk to Shen Yun dancers, and full disclosure, actually, my two sons, who originally were just focused on baseball, that's all they did, and they were pretty good at it. But they got in with some friends who did classical Chinese dance, and they've actually been with Shen Yun, first with the academy and the college, and with dancing with Shen Yun after that for 7-8 years, and they love it. It's interesting to sort of talk with the dancers and some of the motivations. Like, it made me think about what you talked about, is there is a real belief among, I feel, among the company and those, participating in it, similar to what you're talking about, that the CCP is not just tyranny. It's actually some sort of real evil. And their show is trying to cast a light on that. Not just, yeah, you have the CCP and the stuff on the surface, but the CCP constitutes a real evil in the world. And if we can, I think the idea is, if they can get on stage and show what that really is, and that there is a benevolent creator, and we are all connected to him, and there is a divine connection to all of us, and there's a goodness to humanity. I mean, there's such a lot of hopeful, inspiring messages in the show. They really feel passionate about this hope, this inspiration, this connection to the divine. We want that on stage too, and it's a defense against kind of this darkness that the CCP represents in the world. So I think there's I guess what I'm trying to say is what you said earlier really resonated with me, and I hear this a lot among the dancers. Is there's a real spiritual belief and dimension that there is an evil in the world, and there is an importance to put light into that same world.
And so, what is your assessment of the current strength of the CCP, of the party? Because I know that, one thing that's also been an absolute thorn in their side has been the Trojan, or the Quit the CCP movement, where there's the book, The Nine Commentaries, which was I'd probably say the greatest thorn in the side of the CCP. It was fascinating talking to people about the creation of this book. I think, if I remember correctly, it was written by the editorial board of the Epoch Times, the Chinese editorial board, and it was this book called The Nine Commentaries, and it was like there's these massive underground printing networks built up in China to print this book and pass it out. And if you got caught with this book, you're going straight to the labor camp, because it was a book that was undermining the CCP. But actually, let me see if I can pull up the website, which I think was just quit the ccp.com, if I remember correctly. I'll find the. Do you recall the exact website for that, so I can show
I
folks?
think it's quitccp.org. Actually, I don't remember entirely. I think it was something like that.
Yeah, here it is.
Or you
So
might
yeah,
Google quit CCP.
so this right
Yeah.
here, that they've had over 441 million Chinese people have quit the party and its affiliated organizations. This is massive. This is 1/3 of the roughly 1/3 of the population of China that has now openly said that they do not want communism in China, and that they do not want to be affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party. So that's to me, like, that's really significant, because if you look at, again, looking back throughout history, the tyrannical regimes, they primarily gain their power through lies and deceit and propaganda. But what happens is that it's like when I forget which communist country it was before. I think it was Radio Free Europe was broadcasting, I think, the Red Horizons book or there's a certain book they were broadcasting in to the people. And once the people living under that regime realized the truth, the regime fell. So that the people seeing through the lies of the regime is one of the greatest threats. So looking at this, that almost 500 million people have quit the CCP and its organizations. How do you think that the CCP is maybe on its last leg? Is it desperate? Is it very powerful? Like it makes I mean, art of war, when you're weak, look strong, etc. How would you kind of gauge where the CCP is currently sitting right now?
Well, I'm glad you brought the site up, because I think that's one of the most important metrics of measuring domestically where the CCP is right now. Because as you mentioned, after I think 16, 17 years, for the last 16 or 17 years, Falun Gong practitioners and supporters, by the millions, by the way, I mean, it's huge, have been going out and doing exactly what you're talking about, not just handing out this book, but also just printing out, doing what we call local shaming. So like they might be in a village, and down the road, one of their neighbors happens to be a guard at the prison camp or what have you, and just tortures someone to death. That news gets out. They print out a leaflet, and guess what they do? They hand it out all over town, and it has a real impact. And so they've been doing things like this, handing out the Quit CCP book, handing out these leaflets for many, many years. And we hear constantly of stories, little pockets around China, where the police chief, the CCP head of the local community just says, you know what, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not going after Falun Gong. I'm not going to put them in prison anymore. And so, I mean, the persecution overall is still very horrific broadly, but there's a lot of these little pockets. And so I think domestically, there are a lot of indicators that the CCP is on its last legs, that has lost all support from the people. So that's one part of the equation. I think if you look outward, it really is a mixed bag, I would say. The CCP has spent so much time and so much money. Like if you look at the unrestricted warfare roadmap, right, that was created, what was it, like back in 1999 or 2000 by the two Chinese colonels, they've really executed on a lot of that. And that is the ability to do elite capture, capturing leaders of industry and government around the world with some sort of tie or something to the Chinese government, influencing everything from our media to our government to corporate institutions to even NGOs, nonprofit institutions. So I think, as ironic or strange as it might sound, the threat domestically or in the United States and in the West has gotten stronger and stronger. And I think that's the thing we need to really be careful of. They may be still weak at their core in China and things are starting to fall, but they are able to pull levers of power here that to this day still surprise me. And I've been studying this for close to 30 years. And I think that's the real alarm bell. And that's where we really need to be vigilant, is about how they've now weaponized us against ourselves, if to put it that way, and really sort of pick that out. And look, I understand it's a difficult equation. We are a land of the free. We have liberty. People can speak their mind, but how do you navigate that when the individual speaking their mind in front of you may be acting at the behest of the largest tyrannical regime in history? Going back to that TikTok lady. What are we looking at? Are we looking at a woman of her own free will is angry and expressing her views? Good for her. I don't agree with her views, but good for her. Or are we looking essentially at an agent? It could be either one. And I think that threat, we have constantly underestimated that threat.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And this is why I wanted to have you on the show today, because in the past couple of days, I saw these trends. I was seeing these posts, and 'cause I'm following Twitter, which to me it represents the pulse of the thinking of our civilization. I mean, it's probably one of the best representations of where the collective thought is. And so I'm thinking, wait, I'm seeing this massive trend of this RedNote app, and everyone's talking very positively about it. And it's like this is really concerning, because again, I've been I've been fighting up against Chinese propaganda since early 2000s. I mean, for me, what happened is, I think it was in 2006, I was in college and I met this guy that was a Falun Gong practitioner. This is when I was living in Ohio, that was on a full ride scholarship for mechanical engineering at OSU. And he's this nice young Chinese guy. I think it's William Huang, I think his name is. And I got talking to him, and I was like, well, like, what's your background? And I met through a friend, and he spent like 8 years in a labor camp. And one of the things that he had to do was he had to crack open pistachio nuts. And I think the Epoch Times did an article, within a couple of years of that time I met him, explain this, and how he had to work like 16 hours a day cracking pistachio nuts, which the Chinese call happy nuts, because when you crack them open, they have a little smile on them. And so American companies were shipping pistachios. So you buy these nuts grown in California, where they're shipping them to China, and they have these inmates that are forced with bleeding fingers and everything. They're forced to crack open these nuts for 16 hours a day, or else they're tortured. And I remember he told me that they had a piss bucket in the corner, and if the nuts were too stubborn to crack open, they'd toss them in the bucket to soften them a little bit, and then they'd be able to crack them. They'd go back in the batch. And I remember I heard this, and I was just young, kind of bright-eyed, and kind of bushy-tailed. I was going to design school, and the world was my oyster. And I hear this. It's just like I grew up in a really peaceful, conservative Christian home and community, small town America. I couldn't believe this, and that's what led to me moving to New York and getting involved in human rights work and media work, because like my world shattered. It was like because I was studying being an industrial designer. I was like, I don't want to just design the next toaster that's going to be manufactured in some factory in China. I was thinking, like, I had to do something about this. And so that was, at that time I had a conversation with God. I was like, okay, God, like, this is now my mission, is to try my best to expose communism and help people see past its lies, which has led me to where I am now. But it's just crazy seeing how this is still going on, and that these people are still suffering over there. But it's also crazy to think that you've got these these campaigns going, where they've somehow taken what I think to be very intelligent media personalities and alternative and independent media people, and they've confused them. And that you have people saying, like that woman said in her video, it's like, gosh, like, I've been convinced that China was evil. This is propaganda from my own government. And like, not to say our government doesn't use propaganda against us. Like, Obama actually opened that up when he changed some laws and allowed that. But the thing is that, like, this is pretty serious, because if Americans don't, if collectively, this is why I want to do this video with you, is because if Americans fall for this, And all of a sudden, you have this huge movement of the people that are supposed to be protecting God, country, and freedom that are now actually defending a communist nation. That's not a good place for us to be in.
Absolutely not. And that's, and that for sure, I've seen that happen time and time again. And then, there's a spectrum of reasons. On one end of the spectrum, it's some sort of capture. They had a business deal in China. They had some personal interest and they were willing to kind of let the other stuff go. And tragically, that's happened to a lot of people. On the other hand, you've got, again, if it's option two with this young lady, completely just deceived. She's got certain principles. She's got things she's seen here she doesn't like, and those emotions are manipulated by an app that's clearly showing her a false picture of what's in China, and she's being weaponized. And I think you see that whole spectrum and everywhere in between. In terms of the influence operations of the CCP here in the United States, and again, going back to what General Spalding told our Congress, do not mistake priorities. That is their number one priority. That is their number one weapon. Take the United States down without firing a shot. They said it very clearly more than 20 years ago, and they've been doing it ever since. And I think, the case of this woman, and again, on the option two side, and many, many, many people like her is an example of that.
Well, Levi, thank you for doing what you're doing, because more people need to understand. So I hope that folks, that if anyone watching this has made it to the end of the interview, obviously it's been good for you. Please help us by sharing this, because this is an important message to get out there, because we have to catch these campaigns as they're happening. Otherwise, you look around and it's like, wait, why are they wearing China shirts at a Trump rally all of a sudden? Like, that's what ends up happening. So we have to be proactive and vigilant. And so I thank you for giving us your time today and your expertise. I know that you dedicate a lot of your life to what you're doing, and I think it's a very noble cause. So thank you, Levi, for what you're doing.
Right back at you. I appreciate you and others that are sort of having these longer form podcast discussions. We can get into the issues, instead of these 2 or 3 minute sort of news bites. People like you who are really grappling with the heart and soul of this country, what's coming after it, what makes us Americans. I think that's wonderful. And again, thank you for having me on the show. Keep at it.
My pleasure. Thank you, Levi. Take care and God bless. Okay, every new year, we all spend a few days seriously thinking about what we can do to improve our lives. And usually it revolves around better health, right? I want to strongly encourage you to do what I do. Take responsibility for your health by taking Balance of Nature's whole food ingredient supplements. Seriously, they're packed with 31 varieties of fruit and vegetable ingredients, from tomatoes to sweet potatoes, and just about everything in between. This is a resolution you can truly keep all year long, like I do. So, folks, this is your last time to put it off, because today you can become a preferred customer at Balance of Nature. So use my discount code SETH, SETH, to get 35% off, free shipping, plus a free fiber and spice supplement. This is an unbelievable new limited New Year's promotion, but you must use my discount code SETH. So call them at 800-2468-751 and use discount code SETH, or order online at balanceofnature.com. Use discount code SETH to get 35% off plus a free fiber and spice supplement.